أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله Alhamdulillah, we praise Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala that we have the chance to be here this afternoon in this masjid to attend the Friday afternoon prayer. Dr. Khalifa asked me to stand here this afternoon to present the dear brother and sister. I must admit that this is my first time I stand in front of the audience to the khutbah, and it is a big honor for me that because the audience is not any audience, but this audience is the students of the Quran. So this is really a big honor for me. My talk today will concern about the Hadith and Sunnah, which I think still is the biggest issue facing us as Muslims. Since I come from a place where the majority of people are, the Muslim or the so-called Muslim masses, I can appreciate more that, to discuss this topic, because you can see from our experience here in the Tucson or in the United States, where Muslims are the minority, that by talking Hadith and Sunnah, we arouse the anger of many people. You can see that some people come here and they make a very violent reaction because our stand in the Quran alone, and to reject the Hadith and Sunnah. And so I can appreciate more the hardship or the danger faced by Dr. Khalifa when he was in the Middle East, where the majority are Muslim. The reaction must be very, very violent to him, and I can imagine too that in most places where the Muslim masses are the majority, they will give a very hard time, or they will ridicule you at the least because you stand against the Hadith and Sunnah. Incidentally, there is a new book by Dr. Khalifa about the Quran, Hadith, and Islam. So I draw most of the book back from the book and also from the Quran. We know from the Quran study in this masjid that the Quran should be the one and only source for us as a guidance. We here, let's see, because we started from the beginning of this masjid as to accept the Quran as the only source, we sort of take it for granted that we take Quran as the only source. However, as I said, as the person who comes from the majority people of majority, the place where the majority are so-called the Muslim masses, discussion of this really takes a great deal of courage, if you want to say that, in those places, because you will face, like I said, a very violent reaction from them. And I think, for myself, I'm still think that I'm very lucky to come here to learn the real truth from the Quran, because this is the place, the first place that I can get a chance to really study what the Quran is, and what, therefore I can see the real truth in the Quran. To my observation, the Muslim masses around the world are generally ignorant of the Quran. They do everything according to what the scholars say, or what the older generation or their parents say. And so they're never there, most of them never there to open the Quran and study it, and they just follow, and they just leave the discussion of the Quran to the scholars. But we are commanded in the Quran that we have to uphold the Quran, and we have to study the Quran to be a good Muslim. Because of the ignorance, there is a tendency that the Muslim masses tend to mix up the Quran with the other sources, because they accept the Quran, but they also accept the Hadith and Sunnah and other sources of jurisprudence as a guidance to the religion. And in the end, they tend to mix up everything. They say that this is from Quran, and they don't bother to open it from Quran to check whether, whereas in the real case it's not from the Quran. One of the good examples that I can find is about the prohibition. Prohibition in the Quran is specifically stated only 4. But if you go to, at least to my place, they will say that not only the 4 prohibition, but you have also another prohibition. Like you cannot eat something that lives in, or animals that live in 2 environment, or amphibious animals. They say that, I'm sure that this must be from the Hadith and Sunnah, but in the end, people think that this comes from the Quran. And I met one guy here that say that also, that this is from the Quran, that you cannot eat this amphibious animals. But when I say, well, please show me the verse in the Quran, he doesn't think that to open the Quran. So I think there is a tendency to generally to mix up, finally they mix up Quran with other sources, and that is why we have to study the Quran, and the only Quran as the source. One of the most popular reason for the advocates of Hadith and Sunnah is saying that in fact we need Hadith and Sunnah to explain the Quran, because Quran is not complete and Quran is not fully detailed, so we need Hadith and Sunnah to explain it. In fact, they are very ignorant of the Quran, and the person in the Quran that says that the Quran is complete, perfect, and fully detailed. This is in the verse, one of the examples that I can find is in the verse 629. Any creature on earth and any bird that flies with wings are all nations like you. We did not leave anything out of the scripture. To their Lord they will be gathered. And also in the next verse, 639 says that those who reject our revelation are deaf, dumb, and in total darkness. Whomever God wills, He sends astray, and whomever He wills, He places on straight path. Also in the same surah, on verse 114 and 115. 114 says, shall I seek other than God as the source of law, when He revealed to you this book fully detailed? Even those who received previous scripture recognize that it came down from your Lord truthfully. Therefore, you shall not harbor any doubt. And 1:15 says, the word of your Lord is complete in truth and justice. In truth and justice. Nothing shall abrogate his word. He is the hearer, the knower. So therefore, this verse clearly shows to us that this nullifies the argument from the advocates of Hadith and Sunnah that the Quran is not complete and not perfect and fully detailed. But like I said, because generally the Muslim masses are ignorant of the Quran, they do not bother to open the Quran and check the argument. Another argument is saying that we need Hadith and Sunnah to explain the Quran. And I met, 2 days ago, I met a guy here in the University of Arizona that just said that. So I think this is also a valid argument that the Khalifa said in his book. Many Muslims, or so-called Muslims, let us say, use this argument as advocates for Hadith and Sunnah. You know from the Quran that only Allah will explain the Quran. You see that in the verse 19 of Surah 75. Verse 19 says, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Well, let's start from 18. Once we recite it, you shall follow this Quran. And 19 says, then it is we who will explain it. So this is a very clear-cut verse that says that only Allah will explain the Quran. Another surah that I can find here is 55 verses 1 and 2. This is the surah most gracious of Ar-Rahman. The first says, God most gracious, and the second says, the one who teaches the Quran. So only we understand and we know from the Quran study that only Allah will teach us the Quran and understand, leads us to understand the Quran. So it also nullifies another argument from the Hadith and Sunnah advocates that says we need Hadith and Sunnah to explain the Quran because the Quran is not clear. Let's see. In the second part of the khutbah, I will try to convey some ideas from the Quran about Hadith and Sunnah. As we can see from the first part of the khutbah, we clearly see from the Quran that we don't need Hadith and Sunnah as source of religious duties because we have the one and only source, which is the Quran. And the Quran is fully detailed, complete, and we don't need any other sources to explain the Quran. And only God, only Allah teaches and explains the Quran. Now the question is why exist Hadith and Sunnah? What is the purpose of that? Before we discuss that, we will see that actually as sole source of the religious duties, the Quran is complete and we don't need other sources. Therefore, the Quran says that we don't need any other sources and therefore nullifies the need for Hadith and Sunnah. But Hadith and Sunnah itself is also proven wrong by itself, because if we read many or various books about Hadith and Sunnah, we can see that there are so many contradictions in Hadith and Sunnah, and so we cannot accept that as a source of religious duties. If we use in mathematical jargon, we use what we call the proof by contradiction. So if we want to prove something, that something is wrong, we assume first that this is correct, and then we find something inside that contradicts the assumption. Therefore, we can prove that this assumption is wrong. And I think this argument can be used also to prove that Hadith and Sunnah is wrong. Because if we read the various books of Hadith, we can find that there are many statements in Hadith and Sunnah, some of them saying that the Prophet Muhammad says, because the Hadith and Sunnah is attributed to the Prophet Muhammad, but the Prophet Muhammad says in one of the Hadiths, according to them, that do not write anything from me except from the Quran. So anything that you write from me besides the Quran, you shall erase it. And therefore, this also said, if we assume that Hadith and Sunnah is wrong, we have to accept this. And therefore, this statement says that we cannot read or we cannot write anything from him except the Quran, because the Quran is revealed from Allah to us through Muhammad. So, besides everything besides the Quran, we cannot follow, because we only follow Muhammad when he talks about the Quran. So this hadith says that because we cannot write anything from him except from the Quran, this nullifies the argument that we have to follow Hadith and Sunnah, because the argument we assume that this is Hadith and Sunnah is correct, but we find contradiction in it, so we prove that this is wrong. Another thing is hadith that says, when somebody asks the wife of Prophet Muhammad, Aisha, to explain about the character of Muhammad that we should follow. And the character of Muhammad, she says, is the Quran. Therefore, to follow Muhammad means to follow the Quran only, and only the Quran, and nothing else. And also, from the Quranic study, we understand that the Quran says we don't need any other sources besides the Quran as a source for jurisprudence. And you see that in Surah 6 also. Surah 6, verse 112 says, additionally, we have appointed for every prophet enemies from among the human beings and individuals, who invent and narrate to each other fancy words in order to deceive. Had your Lord willed, they would not have done it. You shall disregard them and their inventions. Therefore, we can see very clearly from this verse that Allah said appoint from every prophet enemies among the human devils and jinn devils, which narrates to each other, because we understand that when the Jews received the Torah, then they narrate other sources besides Torah, and they create Talmud, which exactly consists of the same thing as Hadith and Sunnah in the Muslim world. So when we see that something is wrong with them, majority of the Muslims do not see what's wrong with us, because there is a very clear parallelism between the Jews and the Muslims, because the Jews fall into the trap of idol worship by creating Hadith and Sunnah in Talmud. The Muslim also falls into the same trap. another surah and another verse in Quran that states that we don't need any other sources except the Quran is found in Surah 69 verse 38 to 47. 38 says, I solemnly swear by the things you see and the things you do not see. And 47 says, this is the utterance of the honorable messenger. It is not the utterance of a poet, however, rarely do you believe. Nor is it the utterance of the soothsayer, rarely do you take heed. It is a revelation from the Lord of the universe. If he ever made up any utterances and attributed them to us, we would immediately punish him and stop the revelation to him. None of you can protect himself. Therefore, the Prophet Muhammad is ordered by God not to utter anything besides the Quran. Now, after we see all these facts, we came back to the first question: why is the Hadith and Sunnah existing? What is the purpose of that? We understand from this Quranic study that Hadith and Sunnah is needed in this Quran, in this work to distinguish between the true Muslim and the false Muslim, because the majority of the Muslim masses will fall into the second trap of Hadith and Sunnah. And therefore, by using the Hadith and Sunnah, we can distinguish between who is the true Muslim and who is the so-called Muslim, but actually they are not Muslim.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له
Allah.